Brother Umar Abdullah Johnson.
Consider, if you would, trauma in a professional boxer. When a boxer is in the ring and he gets hit with a punch, in order for the punch to be traumatizing, it must cause a monumental disorientation to the boxer's sense of self, time, place, and purpose. In order for the punch to have been traumatizing, it must disturb the boxer's sense of not only where he is, but what he or she should be doing at that very moment. The boxer, after getting hit, may usually never knew what hit him because the blow was so strong that it totally erased his memory of even what caused it. More importantly, the only way the boxer can recover from that traumatizing blow during the course of the fight is to evade his opponent long enough to regain his memory, reestablish his consciousness, and thus reorient himself back to reality with a proper understanding of who he is, where he is, and that is fighting an enemy who wants to destroy him. Sometimes the traumatizing punch from a fighter can be so powerful that when it hits, it totally erases all consciousness from the entire body politic. Even automatically regulated functions of the body like breathing and sleeping and seeing and hearing are shut down, and a knockout eventually occurs. But total knockouts are rare. Usually within the body of the fighter are internal states of consciousness that are resilient enough to keep the entire body from being permanently paralyzed by the traumatic punches. Nonetheless, if the opponent continues with a flurry of traumatizing punches, such as would come from a young Muhammad Ali, then the boxer's mental and physical resources are exhausted and a knockout is inevitable. Usually at this final and desperate stage, the spirit and the spirit alone keeps the boxer from falling to the ground. Unless he loses all heart and makes up in his mind that it is better to live a loser than die a warrior, he surrenders the fight. But he does not lose until he makes the conscious decision that all is lost. What I've just given you is a synopsis of the condition of black people in America and all across the world. In fact, watching a boxing match, in my opinion, is probably the closest symbolic representation of what we struggle through every day as a race of people. With the legs being some of us wanting to give out, and the head being others of us who want to push on. And so you have that constant internal struggle, that internal civil war of whether or not to become an African, or whether or not to become or remain what we are, which are Americanized Africans. Tonight, we're going to talk about post-traumatic slavery disorder. The video you just showed were just shown. I chose intentionally because it is a popular video that's shown in colleges. It's not been around long, but the reason I show it because some people think that when we discuss post-traumatic slavery disorder, that we're trying to sensationalize or make sarcastic a condition that doesn't exist. So by showing you a mainstream African-American psychologist giving a legitimate account of what he called the psychological residuals of slavery, not going far enough to call it exactly what it is, which is post-traumatic slavery disorder, thereby putting you in a frame of mind whereby you can understand that post-traumatic slavery disorder is real. It affects every last one of us sitting in this room, and it affects each one of the 40 million Africans in this country. And closely allied with post-traumatic slavery disorder is post-traumatic colonization disorder, which Africans in Africa and the Caribbean and other places are going through as well. So we're going to get started this evening on a very important topic. And as Brother Irie said, this is the first time I've given my professional analysis of what's commonly called post-traumatic slavery disorder. I've discussed it a lot, I've written on it, but this is the first time I've presented on it. Being a school psychologist, I largely present on issues related to education, special ed, disruptive behavior disorders, such as ADHD, which grows out of PTSD, because if our black parents were not PTSD, there would be no ADHD.
Come on. Bring it on.
First slide. PTSD, the definition. Post-traumatic slavery disorder generally refers to a psychological condition that has resulted from centuries of chattel slavery and subjugation of African people that has severely and loosely scarred the ex-slaves and their descendants, cognitively, behaviorally, and emotionally, resulting in extensive and severe maladaptive behavioral and emotional problems that continue to exist 1.5 centuries later after the trauma has ceased. Next. Is this problem real or imagined? Studies show that trauma, pain, and emotional damage can be induced in groups of people, not just individuals, vicariously and retroactively. You have to understand what vicarious means. Vicarious means that you can suffer the same emotional, psychological, social effect of damage just by having known it was perpetrated on your ancestors. It means that a child living in a home where the mother is being victimized can vicariously be abused and suffer a form of post-traumatic stress disorder that is more significant than is suffered directly from the victim, who is the mother herself. Vicarious and retroactive. Very important, because the biggest argument against PTSD is, as the brother said on the video, how could you possibly be going through it in 2007 when that ended in December of 1865? Number one, vicarious. We know it. Number two, it is passed down socially in our teachings. And number three, most important, that is not talked about, you carry it in your DNA. Just as schizophrenia, depression, alcoholism, and other disorders can be handed down in the DNA, how can something more powerful than all of them combined in PTSD not be? But you will never see this put in the diagnostic criteria of the American Psychiatric Association, because the institution of psychology is an American bureaucracy. Oh, yeah. It does exactly what the government wants. And that's why you see ADHD and CD and ODD and ED. Why? Because it is functionally relevant in the situation in which you find yourself. If we go back to the early 1800s, Benjamin Rush, signer of the American Declaration, chief doctor at Pennsylvania Hospital, whose picture is still on the back of the DSM right now, used to diagnose enslaved Africans with a disease called nigritude. And nigritude was a disorder that rendered the human brain useless. And the major symptom of nigritude was black skin. Dr. Samuel Cartwright from the South, another psychiatrist during slavery, used to diagnose enslaved Africans with a disease called drapetomania. Drapetomania was madness induced in the slave that caused them to be inoculated with the preposterous idea that they had a right to be free and escape. So as you can see, any disorder that is created, it is created to do what? Make insane same behavior. In fact, at the end of slavery, most Africans who were put in prisons, because all of your major prison systems have their birth at the end of slavery. You have to know that. They made prisons before they even put you in it, because they knew that when you take education away, and when you take economic opportunity away, and when you allow PTSD to fester in the spirit, you're going to need some prisons. And so what you see going on out in society is nothing but not only social engineering or economic engineering, it is racial and genocidal engineering. And the problem with us is we allow other people to induce in us a sense of panic that makes us so hopeless that we let the government come clear in and wipe us out. So right now you got a situation where the cops are killing and brutalizing, and we feeling so helpless and afraid of one another. We said, well, whatever you can do, Mr. White Man, will be all fine and good with us. But what we fail to understand is when he starts, He does not stop until he gets every last one. Studies show that many diseases are passed down genetically. Why should PTSD be any different? Mental disorders can be learned, transmitted intergenerationally, and as I said, passed down through your DNA. Next slide. Limitations of post-traumatic slavery disorder model. Make sure you're clear in understanding what I'm telling you. PTSD is real, without a doubt, but it is not the only condition, the only psychological or spiritual condition that African people suffer. It is one of the majors, but it is not the only. It is one of others. For example, there are people in America. I happen to know some whose descendants, for whatever reason, never suffered through slavery. There's people in Ethiopia, in Africa, a nation that never suffered under slavery, who still exhibit the same types of behaviors we do right here. So how do you explain Africans who were never enslaved, but yet have those same behaviors? It's because there's other types of phenomena going on as well. And the overarching umbrella to which I give these psychological and spiritual diseases is what I call psychoracial spiritual diseases of not African Americans, but Americanized Africans. Be clear in what you name yourself. Because if you tell people that you're African American, you give the impression that your history was not as bad as what it was. Yeah. See, when you say you African American, that puts you on the same par as someone who says, well, I'm Italian American, I'm Irish American, I'm Chinese American, I'm Japanese American, well, I'm African American. You give yourself a shared identity with people that you really don't have.
That's right.
So be careful of the labels you put on yourself. Because African American, in my professional opinion, represents what? The schizophrenic personality of the Negro. How can you be cultural and materialistic at the same time? How can you be communal and individualistic at the same time? How can you be black and white at the same time? Most importantly, how can you be slave and slave master at the same time? How can you be God and the devil at the same time? Next slide. Psycho-spiritual trauma. Any trauma is a high-impact blow to the self-consciousness of African people that is extremely distressing and causes severe emotional and behavioral shock and damage, with long-lasting psychological effects and other consequences that are far-reaching and go largely undetected. Next slide. Spiritual disease. All mental diseases are spiritual, as the African spirit cannot thrive in an unclean environment. When the mind is polluted, the spirit is affected. The mind is nothing but the conscious expression of the spirit, or the collective ba that some of us incorrectly identify as the chi. I am not an Asian, so there is no chi in me. There is a ba. The unconscious aspect of the mind, or what we think is unconscious, is the ka, that collective energy, that God spirit that runs through all of us, which is the universal spirit, a part of the essence of the great one that runs through all of us. Next slide. The word psychology comes out of Africa, and it did not mean study of the mind. The word psyche means soul and spirit. It is study of the soul and the spirit, not the mind. The mind is only the casing in which the soul and spirit dwells. Sigmund Freud, the drug addict, went into Africa, studied the Egyptians. And if you ever, I should have brought it tonight, if you ever see a picture of Sigmund Freud's office, you would think you were sitting in the office of Dr. Yusuf Ben Yakin, Dr. John Henry Clark, Dr. Amos Wilson. You would think you were sitting in the office of Dr. Naim Akbar and Jawanza Kunjufu and Wade Nobles and Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. In the office of Sigmund Freud are gigantic statues of the African gods and goddesses. Statues of Ramses and the Valley of the Kings. Statues of Imhotep. Why would a Jew in his office have it polluted with the artifacts of your and mine culture? Because in his theory of psychoanalysis, it's nothing but African spirituality. We were the first ones to develop that it was the spirit that ran your body and your mind. We were the first ones to know that only by digging into the deep recesses and cavities of one's soul could you clean out your system of thinking. So what Sigmund Freud did was nothing but steal what you and I already had and give it back to you with another label. Psychoanalysis is ours. In fact, and you'll see that in a minute, so I'm not going to jump too quick. African Americans, or Americanized Africans. The self-identification of African Americans is symptomatic of a mental illness in three main ways. Firstly, the label implies that you freely chose of your own free will to be an American. You did not. You were brought here. You cannot be stolen and then 400 or 500 years later say, I accept the theft.
Come on, buddy. Blow that trumpet.
Now, if you leave and come back, that's something else. But you can't be in the thief's pocket and say, I accept the theft. Because basically your admission is secondary to the control that was already imposed upon you. Secondly, it implies that your children have the rights that are inherent to all citizens of this country. Martin Delany, grandfather Pan-African nationalism, once broke down the word citizen. And he said the word comes from the Latin civis ingenuis. And basically what that means is that a citizen is someone who is not limited in any way, shape, or form in the land where they reside. So are you an American citizen now? Third, it implies that you share a common history, origin, and identity with all non-Africans who also identify themselves as Americans. You're saying that we are similar in some way. Explain to me how. Next slide. The label, proudly worn by most Americanized Africans, represents a distorted perception of reality and a continued longing to be part of an empire that wants absolutely nothing to do with you. Next slide. African Americans and the schizoid personality. A schizophrenic is someone who on the one hand can see reality, but in the very next minute they are totally caught up in their own imagination. Schizophrenics possess two types of behavior. They are delusional and they are hallucinatory at the same time. Let's explain what this is. A delusion, and this is clinical language. A delusion is a belief that is clearly false and that indicates an abnormality in the affected person's content of thought. The false belief is not accounted for by the person's cultural or religious background or his or her level of intelligence. Keep in mind, this slide is not my wording. This is the Europeans' wording. Keep in mind now, the key feature of a delusion is the degree to which the person is convinced that the belief is true. A person with a delusion will hold firmly to the belief regardless of evidence to the contrary. This is his definition, not mine. Delusions can be difficult to distinguish from overvalued ideas, which are unreasonable ideas that a person holds. But the affected person has at least some level of doubt as to the truthfulness. When a person is delusional, they are absolutely convinced that the delusion is real. Delusions are false beliefs, despite evidence to the contrary. Hallucinations. A hallucination is a profound distortion in a person's perception of reality that is typically accompanied by a powerful sense of reality. Again, one minute you see the truth, the other minute you don't. A hallucination may be sensory, which means that you may think you see things you don't see, like freedom and equality. You might think you hear things you don't hear, like we want you to join our political parties. Okay? But these sensory perceptions are not there. So that we clear as we go forward, a delusion is anything you hold that you believe to be true. You believe it, it's in here. But a hallucinogen is something you think you see, but ain't there. Schizophrenic. Next slide. W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a sociologist, in fact, worked at this university, University of Pennsylvania, where he pioneered one of the greatest sociological studies, the Philadelphia Negro. If you haven't read it. It still applies to Philadelphia Negroes today. And although he was not a psychologist, his description of the double consciousness that he put within his soul of black folk, because he himself was torn. And as you know, him and the Honorable Marcus Garvey went toe-to-toe, back and back, because Marcus Garvey said, I'm proud of my black skin. And he said W.E.B. Du Bois was a quote-unquote rabid mulatto. who was looking for a reason to have pride in his white blood. Taking nothing from W.E.B. Du Bois because he was one of the greatest intellects that America ever produced. We're not taking nothing from him, but I want you to see that even amongst the intellectuals, yesterday and today, they still have the double consciousness. I'm talking about the ones who strung out on Egypt and strung out on Kemet and strung out on ancient African civilizations. They talk black but live white. I know because I've seen them. I've met with many of them. I've talked to them. It's capitalism in disguise.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Du Bois said, it is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness. This sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of the world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. Right. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two warring souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. The history of the American Negro is the history of the strife and the longing to attain self-consciousness, manhood, and to merge the double into one.
Right.
I have news for you. That was the 20s. Okay? You can't merge the two. Because as I said, one is absolutely incompatible with the other.
Right.
There is no more natural enemy I've seen anywhere on the face of the earth than the European and the African.
Okay.
Even enemies in the jungle that you think are true enemies can live in peace with one another, but you with him is an absolute unnecessity and an absolute impossibility. Next slide. Americanized Africans. Americanization is a process, covert and overt, that is effected upon African people in an effort to turn them against themselves by becoming unconsciously agents of the oppressor. You can argue or try to deny the effects of slavery because some blacks will proudly jump up and say, well, I never was. And some are right. Ethiopians can jump up and say that. There's Africans in the West Indies who are the descendants of those who fought with Nanny the Maroons. And they never suffered the lash. So true. But even if you can deny the effects of slavery, you cannot deny the effects of Americanization. You feel Americanization if you're in Ethiopia right now. And they are second from the bottom in poverty in Africa. No, you was never enslaved. But the force of global white supremacy is around your neck as much as it is the rest of us. Americanization is something that was done to you. It was not something that you chose. When you say that you are an African American, you know what you are doing? You are putting a positive covering on a traumatic situation. What you are saying is, although I was traumatized, it was not so negative that I can't find some good in it. In fact, I will own my own trauma. Next slide. Psycho-racial spiritual diseases of Americanized Africans. This conceptualization better accounts for the role of an unhealthy spirit in the mental disharmony of African people, and posits that an entire spectrum of spiritual diseases exists, and not just one unitary disorder that can explain all of these imbalances in our spiritual energy. Spiritual diseases of Americanized Africans return psychology to its original African focus, which is upon study of the spirit and not the mind. Although not all Africans live in America, as the chief architect of global white supremacy, the United States, European leader of the world, has been effective in inducing self-alienation and hatred and simultaneous sainthood for white people in the minds of all Africans, no matter where you live on the planet. Next slide. What is a mental disorder? According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, Mental Disorders, Volume 4, Text Revision, which is what we use now, which came out in 2000, okay? And when it came out in 2000, by the way, they took out ADD and put in ADHD. Let me tell you why. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder that used to exist, there is no longer a diagnosis of ADD. Why? Because the drug companies, whose money keeps the APA afloat, needed something that would automatically lead to a prescription. And because there's no drug in the planet that can make you pay attention, they were losing money. So they said, strike it out and put in ADHD. And now under the ADHD, you have two options. Primarily hyper and primarily inattentive. But because you still have the same ADHD label, everybody can get rid of it. Everybody can get Strattera. Everybody can get slide clerked to a tune of $38 billion a year on the backs of black babies. But nobody's telling you that these drugs kill the sperm in a developing black boy's testicles. Nobody's telling you that they kill brain cells on contact. Nobody's telling you that it shrinks the growth of the brain. Nobody's telling you that all of the disruptive behavior disorders comes out of the federal anti-violence initiative that said that black people are so socially and racially inferior that they cannot control their own emotions. So if we want to control the emotions of black people, we got to give them drugs. In fact, we can stop spending so much money on prisons if we medicate the babies as boys, so by the time they get 18, they so comatose, they won't have the energy to punch anybody. If you don't believe me, do the research.
On the way.
According to the DSM, mental disorder is a clinically significant behavioral or psychological syndrome or pattern that occurs in an individual that is associated with present distress, which would be racism in us. The italics, the parentheses are mine. Or a disability, prison. Or with a significant increased risk of suffering death, black on black violence. Pain, self-hatred. And disability, they listed twice, police brutality. And look at the last line. This is their definition. Causes what? An important loss of freedom. That's their definition. Mental disorder strips you of your freedom. Your freedom to do what? Think and act as you should, because what? You are under the influence of a delusion. Next slide. Mental disorders are characterized by a disconnection and disturbance in your perception of reality, although not hallucinatory, nonetheless still very severe. Losses of consciousness and alienation from oneself, a lack of control over your problem, memory impairment, and they are also egocentric. You know what egocentricity means? It means that when you have a disorder, even though it's a problem for everybody else in your race, it's not a problem for you because you actually like it. It's beneficial. So in other words, if I want to live next door to whites and work with them and idolize them and have my son and my daughter marry with them, you might not like it, but for me, it's egocentric. It's what I'm about. So my point is, don't think that because somebody has a mental disorder, they have to hurt from it. Remember, you are unconscious. You are alienated against yourself. But the one thing I do like about global white supremacy, because rarely does global white supremacy let any house Negro die without first making sure they regain consciousness that they are not white.
Okay. Wake up.
Next slide. Even the enemy knows the truth. Now this is small, but what this is this is the actual diagnostic criteria of post-traumatic stress disorder. And when you read it, and I'm not going to read this one because it's pretty small, but if you go online, just look it up. Post-traumatic stress disorder, when you get home, look at the criteria. There is no way that our experience as slavery and as the descendants of ex-slaves could not qualify. But remember, psychology can never validate that. Because while we are fighting for reparations, do you know how much push it would give the movement if they put in that book that PTSD, slavery disorder, is real? Because all mental disorders are what? Medical. So now when you go to the reparations bargaining table, there are long-lasting medical effects to our enslavement. So we have to understand why they deliberately keep things out, to make sure they stay in control. Next slide. Next slide. Proof from the enemy. This is at the end of their criteria. It says the duration of the disturbance, the symptoms, is more, okay, is more than one, what is that word? Okay, the duration lasts more than 1 month. The disturbance causes clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, and other areas of functioning. Social automatically means racial. Okay, and then it tells you that you can specify the post-traumatic stress disorder if the duration of the symptoms is less than 3 months, or if it's longer than 3 months. How about 141 years? Is that long enough? Their own diagnosis confirms our argument. Next slide. Delusional disorder. Cognitive distortions among Negroes. In cognitive psychology, a cognitive distortion is a way you have of processing your world that causes all sorts of problems for you, your functionality, your future, and your people. Delusional disorder. Remember what I said a delusion was? A belief A belief you have despite evidence to the contrary. Because you are not conscious of reality, you continue to hold on to your delusion. Black people, these are delusions that we have. Cognitive distortions, thoughts that we hold true beliefs, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Black people will be treated fairly when they fall in line with what Americans are doing. It's all about class, Brother Umar. It has nothing to do with race. It's about education. They just have to learn who we are. Now that one is real funny. Because there are white racist scholars who can quote Egypt and Kemet and melanin and everything else and hate your guts. So if you think that racism is about education, you are wrong. Racism is about imperialism. Racism is functional for whites to stay in control of the world. They don't just keep you from getting jobs and getting educated because they miseducated. They do it because they truly know who you are, more than you do. And to make sure you never get back, that's why we hold you down. People say that racism is a mental disease. Of course it is. But for whites, it is what? Egocentric. It is necessary for what we're trying to do with you. Here's another cognitive distortion among Negroes. God cursed us, and we will be this way until the curse is removed. I've heard ministers say this. In this day and time, they believe it. It's a delusion. Well, let me ask you this. In psychology, when we're dealing with patients, we always ask them for evidence to the contrary to try to wake them up. Because all therapy is nothing but doing what? Raising your consciousness about the way you think. That is all therapy is. Whether you're depressed, schizophrenic, bipolar, we want to make you conscious of the behavior and thoughts that you have, so now you can be in control of yourself. That's what therapy is. And so we need racial therapy. But here is my question to the contrary. If black people are in the condition they in because God cursed us, what has the white man done so great to make God bless him so much? Now, if you can answer me that, I'll accept the whole curse story. Exactly. Last but not least, this is the good one. We also own slaves. What goes around comes around. That is nonsense. European chattel slavery has no precedent nowhere in the world. And in Africa, most of the enslaved still had their rights as human beings. In America, you were relegated to what? Property. In Africa, slaves were people who were put in that condition for committing crimes and being captured during warfare. Not because somebody just walked by, snatched them up and said, you are mine for the rest of your lives. In Africa, very few slaves were slaves for life. Next slide. Hallucinatory disorders. Remember, a hallucinogen is what? Something you see. It is a percept. You see, you hear, you taste, you smell, but it ain't there. One of the hallucinogens we have a perception. We are Americans. Martin Delaney says our problem, and we going back to 1800s, he was good friends with Uncle Frederick. He said what? That a denizen and a citizen are two different people. A citizen, as I've said, is someone who is not denied any rights whatsoever where they live. That's right. Civis ingenuus from the Latin. A denizen is someone who is allowed to live amongst. A denizen is allowed to live amongst, but they don't have the rights. That's right. We are denizens, not citizens. Blow that trumpet. The Constitution permanently outlaws slavery. Remember, a hallucinogen is a percept. So when we read the Constitution, we see what we want to see, not what it says. Because the 13th Amendment says what? Slavery is abolished except as punishment for a crime. And that's why the minute you are arrested, you become a slave of the state again. You cannot vote, cannot own firearm, and you don't make minimum wage while you're behind bars. And that's why when they let you out on what? Bond, which is a derivative of bondage. Okay. Here's another hallucinogen. The world is divided by religion, not race. Let me tell you something. 9/11 was not about Muslims and Christians. 9/11 was about Arab world supremacy and white world supremacy. It has nothing to do with that. Nothing. And we got to stop trying to translate a racial situation into a religious one. Do you know your history of religion? When I was in Goree Island,
Come on.
above the slave castles was a church. It sat on top of the dungeons. And we got a nerve to think we got something religiously in common with these people. This ain't about religion. It's about racial existence.
Come on.
And then the last hallucinogen is the Bill Cosby syndrome. We got where we are by our own doings and actions. Nobody had nothing to do with this. Now, if somebody can tell me what family values got to do with AIDS and miseducation and police brutality, let me know. Next slide. Problems with Bill Cosby's delusional model of black failure. Okay? It is endemic of inaccurate dichotomous thinking that says that the cause and the solution must be blamed on the same person. See, this is where Bill Cosby's analysis, who's not a leader but an entertainer, but this is where Bill Cosby's analysis would differ from, say, Marcus Garvey. Because Marcus Garvey would say what Cosby said in that the responsibility for solving your problem is totally yours. But unlike Bill Cosby, Marcus Garvey will let you know that it was Whitey who put you in your condition. He's not willing to do that. It absolves white people of any responsibility for the cause or the solution. It is dishonest and fails to give a historically accurate account of the current plight of Americanized Africans. It ignores centuries of governmental, institutional, and legally sanctioned racism that continue to this very day. It fails to account for the fact that Americanized Africans were forced as a group in this country to suffer racism, and it was codified. Remember the word codified. You are the only people in this country who ever had your oppression codified. The only one, not the Jew. It was never codified. Not the Italian, he was never codified. Not the Irish, he was never codified. Even the Asian during the internment camps, it was not codified. Yours was. And they never took it off the Constitution.
That's right.
Because in their opinion, their history is way more important than the way you feel. It totally blames the victim and exonerates the criminal. Mr. Cosby, next slide. The Egyptian law of correspondence, Tahuti, God of wisdom, the God of right. As above, so below, one of those laws. Central to the spiritual problem of Americanized Africans is the fact that it's so hard to express true love for one another when one hates himself or herself. You can only give what you have, black people. Self-love begets racial love, while self-hate can only beget racial hate. Just as two spiritually sick people cannot have a happy marriage, how in the hell can 2 billion sick Africans make a healthy race?
Oh my.
Next slide. Pharaohs and the mystery of Uraeus. My pictures didn't show because I did it in Mac, but that's not a problem. I had a picture of Akhenaten, first man to teach belief in one God, and also had a picture of the great builder Ramses II, both of them wearing their pharaonic crowns with the Uraeus or the king cobra on the front. And the significance of the caduceus. The caduceus is the medical symbol you see off to the left. It is an African symbol. It was actually created for and by Imhotep, the great builder. When you look at the caduceus, which every medical doctor wears, you see the wings of Harut, the son of God, keeping watch over creation. Up, going up, you see 2 king cobras twirling around the phallus through which all life comes. Now, my question to you is, why did the ancient Egyptians, ancient Kemetans, use the king cobra as their symbol? Why did they wear that at the front of their pharaonic caps? After all, the Bible said that, you know, the devil was a snake, and she made, you know, he made Eve bite the apple. Well, he gave the apple to Eve. I think they had a hustle going on, and she made everything. Okay. But let me tell you why. If I was to open up anyone's skull in this building and pull out your skull, it would be connected to your spinal cord. If I hold your brain up with the spinal cord sideways, what does it look like? A king cobra. They knew that millions of years ago. Furthermore, the king cobra is a what? Reptile. Reptiles are known for having what? The largest pineal glands in creation. The chemical that is secreted that produces melanin that makes the skin black. So although we no longer have race pride, the reason why the pharaohs or pharaohesses wore the Uraeus was to doubly symbolize pride in skin color and pride in black intelligence. In fact, in early Greece, it was believed that the reason why we was able to do the pyramids and everything else was because of our skin. It was absolutely a fact back then. It is something about the black skin. How could it not be? If the hypothalamus and the thalamus, which encircle the pineal gland, is at the base of the brain and is considered the brain's brain and it secretes the chemical to make the skin black, how could blackness have nothing to do with your intelligence or functionality? In fact, what we have to do is use our gifts to explain away racism. For example, the frontal lobe of the brain is responsible for all athletic activity. It is one of the largest sections of the brain. So if blacks are more athletically gifted than any other race, how can we also not be more intelligent? But see, we're afraid to say stuff like that. We're afraid for people to call us racist. But you open up any psychology book right now, they still say that the reason why black kids' IQ scores are 15 points lower than white kids is because they are less intelligent. Well, then I say, well, let's look at the babies. Because from birth till age 5, black babies outperform babies of any other race group, including the Asian, until they go to school. But the minute a black child goes to school, their IQ score goes down as they go up in grade. Furthermore, IQ, which is a joke, and I know because I give the test for a living, and knowing who Helen Keller, Anne Frank, and Christopher Columbus was, has nothing to do with how intelligent a black child is. It only is a good Negroid meter. IQ was created by a German racist named Wilhelm Stern who worked for Adolf Hitler. And he came up with IQ in 1913, 14, or 15. I forget the exact year. Same time Mr. Garvey was starting his movement. You got a racist connected with the whole Jewish genocide movement coming up with IQ. You know why they invented IQ? To justify the extermination of the Jews, and then you were going to be next. So the reason why our kids do poorer is by design. I know, because I help field test the items. We test all the kids up front, and then they look and see who does good on what. And if you want to make sure that the white kids stay 15 points above, you just put in the items that they do better on. Come on! And we all, come on, Raheem, study Raheem, study Raheem. It's a setup! Wake up! Wake up! Next slide. Psychological disorders and their relationship to black failure in progress. Delusional, hallucinatory, and mentally unstable people seek therapy for help solving their problems because they have trouble defining their own issues, setting goals, and perceiving their reality accurately. The reason black people can't solve their problems is because we are defining them incorrectly. Our situation is hard, and it's going to take us a lot to get out of it. But it's not as hard as we think. It's because we keep focusing on symptoms instead of problems. Violence is not a problem, it's a symptom of self-hate, miseducation, and a lack of economic opportunity. Half the black men in New York are unemployed, half the black men in Philly are unemployed, half the black men in Newark are unemployed, half the black men in Baltimore are unemployed. I haven't heard a single elected official draw the conclusion. Because don't nobody want to give you no jobs. And we definitely don't want to teach your kids because we know your history. And what we got to understand is even though we down and out, white folks know how quick we can get up if we decided to do it. And that's why they spend so much money keeping us oppressed. And that's why I got to disagree with Mr. Bill Cosby. Because no matter how much we hate ourselves, no matter how much we will hate ourselves, we do not spend the billions that Whitey spends to keep us where we are. That's right. Oh my. The reason black people can't solve their problems, as I said, is because they define them incorrectly. Inaccurate problem definitions will create maladaptive strategies and inappropriate goals. Unfortunately, our most mentally ill people are the ones who make policy for us.
George Bush.
I have a question, and I got respect for Mr. Cobb because he's an elder, but I'm tired of it.
Okay.
And he just put out a book with Alvin Passant. No comment because he's one in the field up at Harvard. But who made Bill Cosby a leader? And we are the only race where our leaders are recruited from the entertainment community. Who made Russell Simmons A leader. Why are white politicians having caucuses with a black man who marries an Asian? And now she divorced him and gonna take everything he had. We're gonna get to interracial relationships in a minute.
All right.
Okay?
Yes, me too.
Next slide. Illusions of progress. The reason black people think things are getting better because they wish they were better. Being delusional can sometimes prevent one from becoming depressed by distorting reality with an attempt to make oneself feel better. This is why you call yourself African American, because you don't want to accept the fact that you cannot be one of them. Delusions prevent us from ourselves. Next slide. Delusional maladaptive strategies for the Negro. We can improve our situation by praying. We can improve our situation by voting. God put us in this condition, only God can get us out, so we might as well just wait, build another big church. We can improve our situation by marching, rallying, and by peaceful demonstration. We can improve our situation through negotiation with the powers that be. Oh, I forgot. We got to wait for another leader to come and save us. And we can actually get out of this condition without nobody losing no money, no time, no lives, no wealth.
Okay.
Remember now, delusion. When you study the history of not just Africans, any people, who do you know climbed out of something like this without making sacrifices? The problem is most of the people you sent up there to do the negotiating are multi-millionaires. They got too much to lose. Much respect to Reverend Jackson, much respect to Mr. Sharpton, but they got too much money to lose.
That's right.
Malcolm wasn't no millionaire. Garvey wasn't no millionaire. Martin wasn't no millionaire. Medgar Evers, Huey P. Khalid Abdul-Muhammad wasn't no millionaire.
Come on. Oh my.
How you going to send millionaires to go and do your bidding? They are Negroisie, not bourgeois. Negroisie. You can't be bourgeoisie. Because bourgeoisie, if you read the Marxist definition, and I'm no Marxist at all, your situation is purely racial. It ain't got nothing to do with class. Class might be inside the race, but it has nothing to do with the barrier between the races. The definition says class is about wealth, not sneakers, trucks, chains, sweatsuits, blonde wigs, and pocketbooks. It's about wealth. Next slide. Reality-based strategies for Negro progress. This is what we need to wake up to. Organized voting alone matters. Let me say that again. Organized voting alone matters. Hardly anyone votes their conscience anymore. They vote as part of a party. If you don't believe me, go to Chinatown. They have meetings when elections come up.
No, you're right.
No, not every single Asian votes that way, but 95% of them do.
That's right.
The teachers union, they force them to go that way. Of course, some teachers don't have to do that. Nobody has to. But because you're so caught up in the group membership, you do it. The Irish, the Italians, the police, the firemen, the labor unions, they don't vote their conscience. They have caucuses to determine who they're going to vote for. Everybody does that but the Negro.
Come on.
On election day, get out and vote. Vote for who? Don't matter, just vote. We just did it on Tuesday. Why are you here? Because somebody told me to come here. What you voting for? Martin Luther King died for us to vote. No, he didn't. He died for you to be free and independent. He did not die for you to vote. And that's what we fail to understand. Don't confuse the goal with the strategy. And we keep confusing the goal with the strategy. Black people got to lock their votes together. We are a minority, less than 20%. Minorities don't win elections. In democracies, the majority rules. So it makes no sense for us to be voting our conscience because we're not going to get anything. And because the vote wasn't organized, when your elected official doesn't deliver, it's nothing you can do because after all, you're the only one who voted for him. Forget the media. Door-to-door street organization is the only method that has ever worked. That's why we can't organize the masses. We too lazy. We want to drive around in Benzes and give out flyers. Oh, and your national leaders? Could you imagine any of them walking up and down North and West Philly, knocking on doors? They're going to think somebody's going to steal their Rolex or something. I didn't say some of them. All of them. All of them. Marches, rallies, and demonstrations only matter if you interrupt the financial process of your city consistently and extensively and not for one day. We go somewhere for 6 hours and wonder why we ain't see no change. And half the people running the joint is only there for ego gratification. That's right. Which is a byproduct of PTSD because we was never allowed to manifest our potential. So every time we get an opportunity to, we want to take over the whole damn organization.
Sorry, y'all, for the interruption.
Not a problem, Queen. Not a problem at all. Come on now. God only helps those who help themselves. God don't have no time for a race of people who ain't doing nothing but begging others. And we got to understand this. The Bible says that you can't live by prayer alone. The Quran says that God don't change the condition of a people till they change it for themselves. No matter what your faith is, there's something in there that clearly tells you that God ain't for people being on their knees all day. If it was meant for you to pray, why did he give you 2 arms, 2 feet, 2 legs, 2 eyes, 2 ears, a mouth, and a mind to think with? See, God is in us. And so what we have to do is manifest the kind of God energy to bring about a change in our circumstance. Let me ask you a question. If you had a couple children and you gave them a house and you let them occupy that house 2 billion years before you let anybody else in, and somehow through their own negligence, their own emotional and religious immaturity, they allow outsiders to come in and steal your house that you built for them. If they came saying, Daddy, Mommy, can you help me get the house back? If you like my daddy, you won't say that. You say, you better go and get my damn house back. And that's what God is telling black people right now. I put you here first, gave you oil and gold and silver and diamonds, built you pyramids, made you the creator of 75% of what white people live off every day. You invented every part of the automobile, but you don't sell one. Do you know that every race on the planet has an automobile except the African? The Jews have one. The Americans have it. The Europeans have it. The Asians have it. Even the Indians have Daewoo. Come on. We spend more money on Cadillacs than anybody else in America, but we don't make none. Come on, people. Next slide. Independence and action is the only thing that's going to get us where we need to be. Independence is the opposite of slavery. Slavery means what? Dependence. If you don't want to be slave, you got to be independent. It's the only protection against what? Genocide. Without independence, without independent schools, your children are miseducated. Without independent hospitals, your babies are killed on the delivery table. Without independent food markets, your food can be poisoned at any second. Without an independent police force, your community isn't safe. Without independent farms, you can't eat. Without independent businesses, your community don't even belong to you.
Come on.
It must be independent, black people. Again, going back to the Garvey W.E.B. Du Bois wars. W.E.B. Du Bois poked fun at Mr. Garvey. He said, well, Marcus Garvey is a fat, big-nosed, big-lipped, nappy-head Negro from the West Indies who's running his organization from a half-finished church in the ghetto. In response, the Honorable Marcus Garvey said, all due respect, Mr. Du Bois, I'd rather have a half-finished church than I own. They'd rather be downtown in a skyscraper that white people put me in. All right. And that's what we got to get to. I don't care if the store don't look as good as it should, at least we own it. I don't care if the school only got 50 kids in it, at least you call the shots. Do you know that if you run a private school that the government can't come in and make you do nothing? But the minute you take $1, they can come in and wash you up. And that's why we got to stop taking that free money, black people, because nothing is free. You pay for it with your silence and independence. Everybody drunk off free money. That's why the church can't stand up no more, because they all getting faith-based initiative funding. Gotcha. Faith-based initiative funding. And we're going to open this up to Q&A in a little bit. Next slide. Religious delusions that have historically hurt black people. Serving yourself is a sin against God. We believe that. You are supposed to love everyone else as much as you love yourself. Anytime you have a meeting with all blacks, first thing they want to say is, why are we the only ones here? When the Anti-Defamation League meets, nobody looking for you. When the Asians down Chinatown meet, Nobody going in the gallery grabbing you out the sneaker store. Okay? So why are we the only ones who want to see something other than ourselves at a meeting? You know why? Because we don't value ourselves enough to fight for ourselves, but we'll fight for one white person. Independent race-based organizations is the work of the devil. What you mean, race first? We God first. Religious identity is the only identity. Yeah, right. They just elected a new Catholic bishop a year or two ago as a black man who had more status than all the rest of them, and they jumped him over by a white. But I gotta ask the brother, Roman Catholicism came out of the minds of black people. St. Peter, a statue of whom is in the basement of the Vatican right now, whose feet is kissed by the current Pope, was a black man. So how did you allow yourself to get swindled into an associative order run by your enemy? Children should not be raised with racial consciousness. And this is why your daughters hate themselves. Did you know that about 6 months ago, a sister from one of the historically black colleges replicated the Kenneth Clark experiment to help win the Brown versus Board study? She did the exact same thing. And guess what? The exact same result. Black kids still think the white doll is pretty. It's your fault. When you bring them home from the hospital, everything hanging up in their bedroom is white cartoons. You read them white books, white movies. Since you think you're special, you send them to white schools. And then when they want to get out, you want to call me out. Oh, brother Umar, can you help me? I took my daughter out, and now she can't stand it. They talking about her hair, calling her nigger. I'm telling you the truth here. Can you think you can get us back in that charter school? No, I can't, because I told you don't move it yet. I'm not telling you not to send your child to a white school, but I'm telling you you don't send them to a white school until they have enough race pride to deal with the racism. What the hell good is Jesus or Muhammad in the school when everybody believes in Jesus and Muhammad? They ain't debating religion, they debating her race and culture. You gotta teach them who they are. We don't want to talk about Christianity, we're Christians too. We want to know about you Negroes. Next slide. Reckless materialism and black mental illness. Shopaholics have a long history of wasting excessive amounts of money on useless merchandise in an effort to make them feel themselves better. This is real. This is real. The research is clear. Depressed people shop more than others because the euphoric feeling they give of buying something new makes them feel better. And the reason why black people who gross $850 billion a year, which makes you the 10th richest group on the face of the earth, the reason why you spend it all on junk is because you want to feel better. And nobody's tying our spending behavior to our psychological condition. You must do so. Shopping amongst Americanized Africans has been one of the single most destructive uses of collective finance to a tune of $850 billion. There's only 9 groups who make more money than you. They all white and Asian. We are king of the Africans and ain't doing nothing with it.
Nothing.
Next slide. Other behavioral manifestations of mental illness in Americanized Africans. The blonde hair syndrome. The hazel and blue eye epidemic. 50% of all the black girls in the middle schools where I work got hazel or green. And it don't look cute to have black skin with blue eyes. You look like something from Fright Night. Oh, living with white people. But this is starting to change. I was reading an article in Newsweek, I think it was, and it was talking about how all the blacks are moving back into the ghetto because of the way they're being treated in the suburbs. And see, now with the Gen 6 and with the West Virginia situation, it ain't safe no more. So now they want to come back into the projects, and the projects say, no, Negro, get back out there. Next slide. I have best friends that are white. Yeah, until a race war kicked off. Interracial marriage. Interracial marriage. Frantz Fanon, who unfortunately was married to a white woman, had the courage and honesty to say, in his famous book, Black Skin, White Mask, if you haven't read it, please do. He conceptualized black-white marriages as a love for what the European represents, and not for who they are. 90% of all black-white relationships are wealthy black men and less than wealthy white women. It's a trade-off, brothers. You don't marry them because you love it, and most of the time they not cute, they nasty looking.
Blow that drum.
And I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but when I see the basketball players and the football players come out with their wives, they not attractive women. So you can't tell me you did it because she looked good. Hell no. You wanted to be in that race. And you willing to give every penny you earned just to say I'm with her. Like all business arrangements, marriages are financial institutions. And my biggest problem I got with interracial relationships are two. As Dr. John Henry Clark said, whenever you have children who are mixed race, you create a race in between. And when you study the history of blacks in this world, and when you study our colonization, Alexander the Great and Napoleon did not conquer Egypt with white armies. They used the half-breed blacks to fight the African nations. I know, because I got friends who are half and half and they don't know where they stand. And they come to me about it. So when you do that, you're doing a disservice to the baby, because this world is black and white. You can forget that human stuff all you want. Because I ain't never heard of a cop accidentally beating up a white who he thought was black. Of course you get some who you don't know, but most of the 2 billion of us know exactly where we belong. That includes the Puerto Ricans, who think they are something else because they speak Spanish. That includes the Indians of India, who think they are somebody else because they got another religion. They are Africans. And when you count us up, we outnumber everybody, including the Asian. Second thing, not only do you create a race in between, but also, when you die, and all women live longer than all men. If I marry a white woman, and I'm rich, and I'm worth 20 and 40 billion, or a couple hundred million like Russell, when I die, all my money go to my wife, because it's a business relationship, just like in a partner. Now, do you think that woman, Kamora Lee, is going to ride past the ghetto and drop a $50 million check off for the poor black? Hell no! That's why you got to marry black women. Yes, they might be selfish, but they're going to do a little bit more for the race than somebody else would. Next slide.
I got your back.
If you're going to deal with interracial relationship, we also got to deal with same-sex relationships. The psychological castration. Let me say that again. The psychological castration of black men is an American pastime that continues with police brutality. It has come with its share of psycho-spiritual ramifications, including the idealization of womanhood by black men who feel incapable of living the expectations that come with true manhood. Furthermore, most homosexual black boys didn't choose it. They were molested. I know, because I do therapy with them. 9 out of every 10 I meet did not thought they was born that way. They know, Brother Umar, I was made this way because my uncle, my grandfather, the man next door, my mama boyfriend, played with my testicles when I was a baby. Our kids are being molested by people they know, not by strangers.
That's right.
In addition, a projection of black women as less than feminine has influenced many to abandon what they consider a bestial womanhood. Since we can't look like white women, or walk or talk like white women, hell, I might as well be a man because I'm not doing a good job at this. In addition to the fact they learn to hate black men because what father was it in their life, so they developed that antagonism that says, you know what, I hate my father so much, I don't even want to spend my life with a man. Give me a girl.
Oh my.
It's real.
Really real.
Next slide. Black on black violence, a case study on the effects of racial schizophrenia. Delusional beliefs about the cause of violence and hallucinatory strategies about how to solve it are at the center of our failed attempts to impact and control black on black violence. Prayer, rallies, marches, pleas for peace, lack of family values, absence of religion, poor parenting, lack of black men stepping up, lack of moral values, Generation X music, and hip-hop have been blamed for the proliferation of black homicide. However, these are symptoms, not causes.
Come on.
Next slide. The triangular model of hopelessness, as I said earlier, black on black violence is the result of internalized racism from slavery.
That's right.
Miseducation. In the city of Philadelphia, 14,000 kids drop out every year, mostly in the 9th grade. Jobs. How about, let me tell y'all this. Did you know that in the city of Philadelphia, there is a contract rule between the school district and the teachers union that says no more than 40% of all teachers in any school. Listen now. Philadelphia, the students are 87% black. There are schools with nothing but black kids in it, and that's fine by me. But listen to my point. There's a rule that says no more than 40% of the teachers in any school, no matter how black the student population, can be black. But there's no limit to how many white teachers could be in the school. And we talking about it ain't no institutionalized racism. Everything that happens to black people is planned 100 years ahead of time.
That's right.
Next slide. We're going to keep going because I want to get to keep on moving. I have more for y'all, but we'll come back and do this part 2 coming.
That's right.
Keep sliding. I want to get to the 13. And this is all stuff we'll get to. Part 2. March 28th, right, Brother Irene?
That's right, absolutely.
Part 2. They said all the way to March, brother? What's going on?
We're going to come up with some ingenuity to make sure we fill that gap, too.
Right.
When y'all hear
Keep
about
going.
it, just show up.
Keep going. Okay, back up. Back up, okay. Key features of the spectrum. Okay, and what I'm going to do, because my contacts is kind of, I got to walk up. See, this is all new material. All right? But I need to see this because we want to focus on this. All right.
No, you're not. No, you're not.
Come in. Oh, you know what? I can read from my screen. Woo! All right, here we go. This is perfect. In fact, there we go.
Yeah.
That'll be good.
You all right.
All right, all right. What are psychoracial spiritual diseases? These are the key features of the spectrum, good people. Number 1, they are all caused by direct and indirect prolonged exposure to covert and overt organized white racism. Number 2, they are all socially learned and passed down from generation to generation. Number 3, they cannot be cured by white psychology or white psychiatry because they help to create them. Number 4, they are all the outgrowth of ignorance and misunderstanding about the potential your race has for improvement. Number 5, they are all anti-independent in nature and preclude the existence of thought independent from the philosophy of whites. They are all based upon a deeply held belief that white supremacy and black failure are permanent, universal constructs. They are all based upon a survival instinct which says, I will do what I must to live comfortably in this world, no matter what the cost to my dignity, honor, or respect. These spiritual diseases are all side effects of the Americanization process of which slavery was a part, but not the sum total. They are all ways of coping with racism, but are maladaptive for the victims. These are all thought disorders that grow out of spiritual domination and subjugation and characterized by a distorted view of reality. They are all victims of Americanization and white supremacy, but are usually unconscious of this. They can be mild, moderate, severe, or they can exist as brief episodes. As they all involve delusions and hallucinations to some extent, they are all schizophrenic in nature. Now I'm going to give you my 13 spiritual diseases. Next slide. Okay, what I wanted to do, let me roll through them because I'm going to hit all 13, and I'm going to go quickly. The first one, internalized genocide disorder. This is commonly called self-hatred and is characterized by an intense longing to destroy anything that reminds us of ourselves. This is disgust for African people to the point that you have erased all compassion and mercy from one's heart. Victims of this disorder believe that they can hate all other fruit, but not themselves. Yet what they hate is their very self, reflected at them daily by manifestations of other members of their own race. These are those when they hear negative press or events inflicted upon black people, they say they get what they deserve. And I don't feel sorry for them. I wish I didn't belong to this group. Yet they praise other groups but fail to recognize the same qualities in their own group. Their hatred for the self turns to rage, homicide, suicide, and abortion. And interracial marriages, which is primarily a tool, though ridiculous, to try to escape from one's race. Do you know that when you have that mixed race baby, it's only because you're tired of looking at yourself? These Negroes support anything that can be done to prevent African life from living, thriving, and existing. This includes changing one's gender, transgender Negroes, or choosing a mate from the same sex. Next slide. Internalized genocide. Cultural cosmetology. This is characterized by those who tend to be more well-versed than other members of their race on issues of culture, history, politics. They wear dashikis, locks, change their names, travel throughout Africa. However, most of the changes they made were external and cosmetic. They have not internalized the values they teach to others, and their cultural costumes. Cultural costumes only serve to shield and keep hidden the true European values and thought process that they espouse. Many African-centered scholars and community leaders are represented in this group. They espouse black pride, but they live in white suburbs. They espouse black pride, but they don't teach at black college, they teach at white ones. Many of whom suck the economic blood from the black community in the name of scholarship, but they don't do nothing for free. What they call struggle is nothing but capitalism in disguise. Next disorder. Post-traumatic slavery disorder. This is a disorder characterized by a total lack of knowledge of self and what one is truly capable of. It is characterized by a tendency to view white people as superior to blacks in every way, shape, and form. It posits that the greatest accomplishments for an Americanized African is to be accepted and to please white people. It also is characterized by numbing against the mistreatment of one's people and a compassion and mercy for the oppressor that is rarely exercised for one's own group. We have pity for whites, but we don't have pity for ourselves. This disorder is the most entrenched of the 13. It tends to be shared by entire families, rarely noticed by the victims, as it has been firmly established since the days of slavery. Next disorder. Infantile behavioral disorder. Pay attention to this. It's characterized by Americanized Africans who don't have a firm hold on their priorities in life. Their main strategy for coping with racism is to wash themselves in material garbage made by the enemy. They behave like children who spend their entire allowance as soon as they get it, and it's usually spent on toys such as sneakers, chains, rims, vacations, automobiles. Most importantly, this money could have been better spent for the benefit of the family or the race, but as children, these Negroes tend to live for today and for the next payday. Life has become a world of false success paid for by checks they can barely afford. Next slide. Emotional theology. This is characterized by Americanized Africans who hopelessly turn their problems over to God without choosing to do anything about them. They have chosen to deal with racism by escaping to the church and the masjid. They tend to blame God for racism, conceptualizing it as a divine decree rather than what it really is, which is the absence of initiative on our part. In the absence of a true desire to live in the world as men and women and hold our place. What they call piety is really pity that they have for themselves, choosing to live in failure as a sign that they are righteous. You hear that? We like to be oppressed because we think that means we are righteous. They have chosen to interpret religious scripture from the fatalistic standpoint rather than from the resurrective standpoint. Their hypocrisy lies in the fact that they believe that Jesus was punished unmercifully and rose in 3 days. Yet they don't believe the same is true for our race. Because religion serves as a shelter for the spiritually weak and not the spiritually strong, they have chosen to spend their money on multi-million-dollar prayer houses rather than on institutions that make that what the race really need. Their real hypocrisy lies in the fact that they are waiting for heaven, but they are totally content living in hell right now. Next slide. African inferiority disorder. This is characterized by Africans who have been thoroughly brainwashed to believe that white is right, black is wrong. Closely associated to PTSD, they believe the best achievement in life is to be accepted by whites. They regard white accomplishments as superb and never even dare criticize such works. They believe in the superiority of white institutions, Asian institutions, and Arab institutions. In fact, some of them would tell you that Arabic is the first language. Unlike PTSD, they are impressed with the accomplishments of all races, not just their own. Some of these are Muslims who teach their children that the Arab language and Arab people are superior. These are some college-educated Negroes who never dare attend a black institution. If so, they consider themselves as blessings to the natives. They see no need to visit Africa. They view Africa as a despicable continent fit only for the sick. They tend to look down on all other members of their race, not with hate, but with shame. Always wonder why God cursed our people. When given compliments by whites, they jump for joy, but when such accolades are bestowed by members of their own race, they don't even show up to receive them. They falsely give off impressions of black pride, but not because they love being black, but because they think they are an asset to their race. Next slide. European personalization disorder. This is characterized by Africans who try their best to copy the cultural, social, economic, and racial habits of whites. They intentionally dye and fry their hair in an effort to look more like the norm. They change the sound of their voice, even the way they laugh. They go to white social events because they think that white culture has more to offer than they own. They teach their children to assume the interests of white children and to copy the social traditions of whites, such as crossing their legs, taking the bass out of their voice, and opening the door for white women, but not black women. They read Homer, Socrates, but great African literature is no interest in them. They have thoroughly become Frankensteins in the black community. They learn to love white music, white food, white vacation spots that are valued by Europeans. They name their children white names as a way of paying respect to the greatness of their heroes, most of whom are white. Next slide. Learn helplessness disorder. This is characterized by the lazy Negro who believe there's nothing they can do about their lot in life. These Negroes tend to also have a diagnosis of emotional theology disorder. They waste the few pennies they have on cigarettes, alcohol, blunts, cable TV, and the collection plate. They simply escape from white racism by getting intoxicated and sitting on the steps all day hoping they hit the lottery. The children are taught that life is not what they make it, but rather that what they were born into and permanently fixed. As such, the children don't try to achieve in school or life, and they usually drop out. Often the boys are put on psychotropic meds because the parents are hopeless to help them with real discipline. Sadness and depression run rampant with these people who tend to blame everyone but themselves for where they are in life and what has become of it, failing to realize that the valuable time they waste every day doing nothing is their worst enemy. Next slide. Horrific paranoia disorder. These are Negroes who are so afraid of white people that they are terrorized against speaking up for themselves and towards white people. They teach their children to fear whites and not to speak out at any cost. They don't join black organizations of any kind unless they're told it's okay and acceptable by whites. They are utterly fearless of white backlash and tend to smile at white people all day for fear they might accept them otherwise. Next slide. Tribalistic disunification disorder. This is one of the most widespread disorders in the Pan-African community and is unique because organizations can be diagnosed with it as well and not just individuals. This is characterized by a tendency to view all black groups and people who do not fit your own personal, religious, or political ideology as your enemy. They go to war with black people, war with black groups simply because they are different from their own. These victims tend to have a neurally constructed and robotic conception of who's acceptable to be their friend or to be within their social circle. They don't feel comfortable unless they are at war with someone in the community. They destroy organizations they enter and run others away by instigating fights with other groups of people. Such persons view their enemies as people who belong to different churches, mosques, neighborhoods, frats, sororities, lodges, unions, community organizations as the enemy. No organization, no neighborhood is too small for these Negroes not to find an enemy. Next slide. And I'm going to stop with these disorders for the sake of time. I got other stuff after this, but I'm going to just give you all these, and then we'll go to Q&A. Radical individualism disorder. This is characterized by Negroes who think that they are judged not as a member of the group, but as individuals. They say, I'm not black, I'm just me. I'm not an African, I'm a human being. They are blinded by so-called individual accomplishments in a black neighborhood and think they can be successful without the support of the community or race. They never discuss racial issues because they don't believe it's necessary and simply speak about their own personal opinion and ambition. They think that society is fair and failure is totally the responsibility of the victim, like Cosby. They think most black people blame whites for failure to make excuses for themselves. They see no evidence of institutional racism or any other kind of discrimination. They think that once white people get to know us, we will be all right. They are politically retarded and totally unconscious of where they are in space and time. Next slide. Explosive hatred disorder. We coming to the end. This is characterized by victims who have internalized the effects of white racism to the extent that it has damaged their ability to regulate their emotions around whites. They hate the sight of whites and rarely understand that the energy they spend hating white people could be better put to use by helping themselves. They spend most of their time at meetings talking about what the white man has done, but spending very little time discussing what we can do. They are not progressive in their thinking and have reduced their contribution to the struggle. They're coming up with all sorts of pseudo-religious theories regarding the white man and his purpose. They do not understand the art of war, and thus they are too full of hate to be of much use to their own people. They are a total waste of talent and energy because they can't stop thinking about the white man long enough to think about themselves. Next slide. This is the last one. Spiritual disease, not otherwise specified. The full criteria for any of the previous 13 have not been met, but these Negroes manifest several symptoms of the various disease, which is seriously undermining their spiritual health. One must keep in mind that any Americanized African can have multiple diagnoses, as comorbidity is rather high amongst Americanized Africans. There is no clearly distinct lines between any of the 13, and you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 at a time. Moving down, I'm gonna just run to this. This is gonna be part 2. Internal reparations, spiritual redemption, and Pan-African reconstruction. Also, African American Museum, I'm doing a presentation on black male-female relationships. Write down the date, Thursday, December 13th, 6 to 8 is free, 7th and Arch, African American Museum. And then I have my 3rd series at the African American Museum starting in the new year. Booker T. Washington, Merriman Cloud Bethune, we declare war on educational failure. January 24th, day after my mother's birthday, we're going to deal with disruption in the class. February 21st, I think that was what, Malcolm's birthday or assassination day? Okay, that was the assassination? All right, on that day, we're going to remember Malcolm, and also we're going to talk about depression, anxiety, and suicide in our kids. And then on March 20th, we're going to talk about learning disabilities, knowing the difference between a learning challenge and a learning disability. I'm tired of wasting my time testing black kids who are gifted, but were believed to be retarded. Thank you.
Let us stand and give a brother a great round of applause and what we're going to do. As we take a deep breath. As we take a deep breath. So I want you to take a deep breath because we're ready to go into Q&A. I want everybody to stand up. Stand up for just a second. And just with this.